My next guest is Kentucky State Chair for U.S. Term Limits and a former state director for Senator Rand Paul, Rachel McCubbin. Rachel, welcome. It's good to have you on Wilkow.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be with you.
There's so much that I would love to ask you about because you've been on the term limits issue for such a long time, and there's really a need for it now more than ever in so many different respects. What's the overriding argument for why term limits should be adopted, and sooner rather than later?
The overriding argument is that our system is broken. It really is so prejudiced towards the incumbent that it just suppresses new ideas coming into the market, and it makes it almost impossible for someone to defeat an incumbent. It takes care of a lot of the corruption of special interests that sort of latch on to the incumbents, and it just clears the decks and gives us an opportunity to bring some new ideas and new flesh and blood into our United States Congress. And it's an idea whose time has come.
I know there are many people, some of the Trump supporters would call them rhinos, that have supported Mitch McConnell for a long time. For me personally, he's been a mixed bag. I've got great respect for what he did during the Trump years in terms of getting judicial appointments set up. I mean, we had, I think, close to 300 judges added to the circuits, and many of them in very important positions that will be there for a very long time. Not to just mention the Supreme Court, which has now revolutionized where this country is headed from a jurisprudence standpoint. But even someone like Senator McConnell, who's done a good job at times being leader, there's people that get tired of him being there and thinking he should give an opportunity for the young bucks to come along. So what is the argument for how long you'd like to see term limits in place? What types of kind of guidelines would, if your group had a way of saying this is our wish list, what would it include?
Well, it would include just a couple of terms in the House and the Senate so they could add together. But those are the types of things that would be hammered out in a convention where the states got together and worked out those details. But at the very least, it should be just a couple of terms in each house. And I couldn't agree with you more, Kevin, about your comments about Senator McConnell. I've been involved in Kentucky politics for a long time, and I have enormous respect for his knowledge and skill and the things that have occurred in Kentucky, really with Senator McConnell's help. But in my opinion, this should not be a referendum on one person.
Right.
You could ask me about Speaker Pelosi, for example. It shouldn't be a referendum on starting a countdown clock for Speaker Pelosi. And at the same time, it also I shouldn't avoid term limits if I have a loyalty to a member of Congress that I'm very fond of. For example, Senator Paul.
Right.
I think he's doing a super job, and he could do a great job for years to come. But that shouldn't negate the argument for term limits.
Well, let me just come at that from a theoretical standpoint. Obviously, the founders thought that there was that people's choice mattered, and that's why they wanted to give the decision-making process to the people as opposed to a king. And so they set up this system that we have. George Washington felt it was important that he not be there forever, and so kind of following his lead, eventually presidents got term limited. But the people's bodies have never, I've never heard serious debate in campaign cycles going forward as to being able to get this done. I've heard a lot of people discuss it. I've heard a lot of really good groups postulate the idea. But when it comes down to really talking about it, is it something that you feel like is in the spirit and keeping of what the founders wanted? Or is it something that we just have to do because the crowd that goes there, no matter really their intentions originally, always kind of end up corrupted by it?
Well, I don't think that our founding fathers ever imagined a professional class of politicians there. People did their service. They went back to their communities and continued the professions that they had before they went to Washington. And I don't think they could have anticipated the special interest monies and how that has corrupted the system as well. So I think they were very wise in giving us a method to amend our Constitution. It should be a very heavy lift to amend the Constitution. We don't want to willy-nilly, be changing it every year. So it's going to be a huge job. And
Right.
I don't think we can count on the Congress to initiate that. It has to be something that comes from the grassroots up. And
Yeah.
when you see the numbers, Kevin, about how many people support term limits, it is, I've worked in public policy for so many years, and I can't think of another thing where you can get people on every side of the aisle to agree, but they do agree on this.
Yeah.
82% of Americans believe we need term limits for Congress. It's a little higher among Republicans, a little lower among Democrats, but still independents as well. And if you don't, believe a poll that you've seen published, I decided to do my very own sort of impromptu poll, and literally for about 2 weeks, every person I talked to, anything more than just a casual hello, I would just say, let me ask you a random question. How do you feel about term limits for Congress? And with only 2 exceptions, they said, absolutely, it's time.
Yeah. Well,
and one of those 2 people I was able to convince after talking about the process. So it's something we can actually get together as a country and talk about. How many things can we literally talk about in our country right now?
I can think of only one other issue that comes close to it, and that is voter ID. I think, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. Common sense things like term limits and voter ID are and don't we have the right to demand that? I mean, Rachel, Washington doesn't rule us. They work for us. These are our employees that we hire and send down there. But yet so many times, especially in the last 2.5 years, it's felt like someone's standing behind a podium pointing their finger in our face saying, you get with the program or else.
Well, and this is an opportunity for the people to sort of turn the tides on that and to make it clear to their elected officials how they feel about term limits. And that's what our organization, U.S. Term Limits, is trying to do.
Yeah.
There are other efforts underway, but I'm very excited about what U.S. Term Limits is doing.
So talk to us about how Andrew's viewers can latch onto your group, stay in touch with what's going on, and get motivated and activated.
It is very hard to remember this. Our website is termlimits.com. So can't get any easier than that, right? You can go there and you can actually sign a petition yourself, and that information be made available to your member of Congress so they start to see the groundswell of interest in their local by their constituents in term limits. What our organization is also doing is organizing state by state. So we're working in the legislatures because we need to get a resolution passed out of a large number of our state legislatures to call on Congress to have an Article 5 convention.
So I want to think a little bit bigger than that. You said that they individually could go. I want everyone watching to not only go, but then forward that link to 20 or 30 of your friends. Because if we think in those terms, we can start to move the needle, and maybe sooner rather than later. Do you have any evidence in places where term limits have been instituted, whether it's on city or local levels or statewide levels, that have demonstrated the benefit of having term limits in place?
I'm not aware of that, but it's an interesting question. I was listening to a speaker a couple of days ago talking about where there's no competition for ideas in local government, like city government, that you just get the most disastrous public policy. And I would think that would be very similar to what happens when you have no ability to elect new blood into a system. So competition of ideas is healthy. Competition in the marketplace and business is healthy. And we need that in the legislature, and I would think at every level, city government on up.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt about it. All right, friends, you heard Rachel make the case, and it couldn't be simpler. Termlimits.com. Sign the petition, forward the link to a whole bunch of your friends, get them to sign the petition, get involved in what's going on in your state, and take action. If you continue to do the same thing or continue to not do the same thing, more well said, you're going to get the same results. And if you are satisfied, just totally satisfied with the way things are right now, then just do that right there. I'm not, and I hope that you aren't either.